Today's episode is brought to you by HP Poly, where premium audio and video meet hybrid work. From headsets to video bars, HP Poly keeps your team connected, clear, and collaborative. Learn more at cdw.ca/poly. Hello and welcome to the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I'm your host, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada. In this episode, we're going to talk about sustainability and technology. We're going to talk about how large technology companies are building sustainable technology pipelines and really why that's important for all of us. I'm really excited to have Frances Edmonds. She's the head of sustainable impact at HP Canada. Thanks for joining me, Frances.
Excited to be here.
So, let's kind of get into it and could you tell me a little bit about your career path? You all haven't always been at HP Canada. What's your career path, and how did you get to the position that you're at?
Started after leaving high school and hitching around Europe for a bit. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I ended up working in a water quality testing laboratory, testing water samples. From that, I realized I really wanted to do more on protecting the environment, sort of seeing that connection between land use, pollution, and then how that affects our drinking water. So I went off and did a 4-year degree in environmental science, and then realized I didn't want to be a lab tech anymore. I wanted to do something differently. So I took the first job I could find, which was basically a Ministry of Labour inspector in the UK. Going into every kind of business and industry you could imagine, from steelworks to little bakeries, and sort of enforcing environmental health and safety legislation. I came to Canada and worked in the chemical and pharmaceutical industries as an environmental health and safety manager, and then moved into HP. I've been here 26 years now, and a variety of jobs, sort of hired in as the traditional environmental health and safety manager. But today my job is very different, and I basically created this role. My job is to help HP win business as a result of our sustainability leadership. And in order to do that, I have to work on changing the way Canada buys today. Without that market signal, no businesses in Canada are going to step up to the mark and make the investments necessary in sustainability. So really, I'm practicing what I would call CSR, or Sustainability 2.0. 1.0 is working inside your own organization to get it to be more sustainable. 2.0 is how do we influence the broader community and businesses around us. And a couple of examples of that is, one, I do a lot of work with the federal government. But also HP has developed the Amplify Impact program, which is how do we help our channel partners become more sustainable? And we're starting to see some real advances on that. We give all of our leadership and expertise away free to channel partners to start their sustainability journey. So,
yeah, and I think it's important, and I think that it's interesting to hear that pivot from being focused kind of as an internal resource to now taking that and really focusing externally with the partner community. So I mean, that's why we started this conversation. So one of the concepts I think that's going to be really key to this conversation, I think it's going to crop up, and it's something that in the pre-call you were helping educate me on, was really the idea of circular economy. So you've already mentioned HP as a manufacturer of technology. You talked about it in your background. You've got mining, you've got steelworks, you've got there's all sorts of components and materials that go into making of the products. You're working with partners. It seems like you're plugged into a bunch of different facets of the circular economy. Could you maybe help me understand that concept and how bringing that together really helps build this future state of sustainability?
Sure. And, you have to do a little bit of a contrast of what does the linear economy look like that we live in today. And Canada is just 6.1% circular. Of all the materials that come into the Canadian economy today, only 6.1% of them end up being circulated back in the economy again. So people think the circular economy is complicated. It's not. It's what our grandparents did. They didn't buy very much. What they bought high quality, and they expected it to last a long time. They repaired the heck out of it to make it last a long time. And then when it finally died as a good, they cannibalized it for spare parts and made sure
Hmm.
nothing went to waste. So it's not a new concept. It's quite an old concept, but it's very different than the way we run our economy today. If you think about how Canadians in particular, we focused very much on that recycling piece as a way to offset the overconsumption guilt that we might be feeling. And we forgot to mention that whole piece of closing that loop. There's no point in diverting things from a landfill if you don't create a market for those things that you've just diverted from a landfill. So we'll come back to this a few times in the conversation today, but we need to stimulate that procurement function by specifying that we need those materials in the goods and services that we're buying today.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, growing up, it was reduce, reuse, and then recycle. And I think you're right. We get so focused on the third phase of that. It really is a, reduce and a reuse. And yeah, I agree. Like I still have my steel toe boots from when I worked at the mine, at a mine site, and I think I've resold those boots 3 or 4 times. But you're right. When you have good quality materials and you make a good quality product, you should be able to expect it to last longer and be more durable. So.
And really, it's what nature does. Nature doesn't have any waste, and we need to be thinking about design at the front end before we actually build anything. I always use the example of a packet of gum. You know, those foil packs of gum that you press the plastic and you get the gum out. Um, that package is fundamentally not recyclable because you've fused the metal and the plastic together. So at best, it would end up going into a smelter, and the plastic would be burnt off as a carbon fuel, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and so we'll kind of as we go through it, I think it's interesting to hear how that concept starts early in the process. So kind of don't want to spoil everything, but we'll kind of get to that. So let's start a little bit about let's define sustainability. So you've already mentioned some of that in the decision making that we do, but when we look at organizations that are maybe maybe they're floundering a little bit, how do we get started? Like what is the infancy of sustainability? Where's sort of the where do most organizations need to start?
Right. So if we define sustainability, it really is about meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of tomorrow's generations. And
Hmm.
again, this is not a new concept. This is something that our indigenous peoples globally have been practicing for millennia, right? It's called seven generation thinking. And really, when you think about the short termism and that maybe that planned obsolescence that we often hear criticisms of the tech industry on that, it's not seven generation thinking, right? We're not really thinking about how the next generation is going to meet their needs. So that's pretty simple.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, we're always frustrated when our cell phone batteries are dying. 18 months into the ownership of the product for sure. So how has sustainability really changed over time? So if we started with we just need to look at tools and products that are going to last longer. How has sustainability grown over your 26 years with HP?
So we'll start off with a bit of the alphabet soup. We've got all kinds of different terms for sustainability, ESG, triple bottom line, all of those things. And they come and go with fashion. I prefer to just stick with sustainability. People kind of understand what that is, but it's more than just the environmental side of things. We have to think about the people. So, supply chains would be a particularly relevant piece in the tech industry. And then how we govern for sustainability. Sustainability is like any other business function. It's a team sport. I'd like you to remember that one. And we need everybody engaged in it as we look at how a business operates.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I mean, when I think to the earlier parts of my career, and obviously, like working in a mining organization, being at site, IT was generally considered more of a cost center, and so the way that we approached purchasing was, I just need to get as much as I can for the limited budget that I have. And so that was always a big struggle for me. When you look at the organizations in Canada, you mentioned, a very small percentage of our procurement is really circular, where you said 6%. Um, is this really a symptom of most organizations operating in that, get the most you can for the lowest possible price?
It absolutely is. There's a term out there, the tyranny of the lowest price, because when we drive for price alone, we're really not buying with value because we're not measuring total cost of ownership and we're not buying with values. So we've allowed ourselves to slip into this thing that, and many civil servants who are buying with our taxpayers' dollars actually believe it's their fiduciary responsibility to take the lowest price. It's a very ingrained practice. And I think it happens because most people really don't understand the impacts of that, right? They
Hmm.
don't think it through. And let's face it, most Canadians today don't have any sustainability education. We never taught about this stuff. I think that we're pretty much there where most Canadians today understand that the climate catastrophe is real, it's happening, and it is man-made. We're not really arguing over that, but they don't really understand the nuances, and they're definitely not carbon literate. So having those conversations to help people really understand how those purchasing decisions impact what happens in the rest of the supply chain. And a good example is a very simple one. If you take the average notebook computer and you extend its life by 2 years, you decrease its carbon footprint by 30%.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I hear you there. One of the interesting things, really traveling and working in places that were sometimes very remote was, there were areas that I would travel to with the mining company I worked for, where yeah, they did field replaceable, the replaced parts, and they had to fix things because they didn't have that readily available, laptop on the shelf to replace the one that just broke down, etc. So I think you're right. I think there's definitely an opportunity to do more there. I guess I kind of think about recycling in a certain way, but your gum packaging example sort of brings up an interesting point, which is, recycling maybe isn't the solve all cure all that I think a lot of us maybe think of it as. What's a more realistic view of recycling specifically for technology?
Well, it starts with design, and the circular economy is trying to fix a design problem. And if you're not thinking about extending product life through repairability, upgradability
Hmm.
during the life, and then how is it managed at the end of its life, before you even design it, you're starting at the wrong end, right? So, if we think about the average notebook computer, what 1,000 components in there, the simplest and cheapest way to build that is to simply glue those components in there.
Hmm.
That makes it fundamentally non-recyclable, or much harder to recycle. So it's about that design process at the beginning. You need to screw those components in there. You need to pay somebody to do that. You need to buy the screws. What's the cost differential between a product that is designed to be repairable and upgradable and properly recycled versus one where everything's glued together?
Hmm.
Which one's cheaper, right? So that comes back to that market signal of the tyranny of the lowest price, driving for cheaper materials, less repairable. And then when we get to the end of life, thinking about how we're going to take those materials and separate them from a complicated 1,000 component product back into their original pieces. And for years we've been doing this in a way where, if you went to see a typical electronics recycler today, the primary recycler, they would take the notebook battery out and then they'd put it through a big shredder and they'd sort of try and get
Yeah.
it down to about 5 centimeter squared pieces. And then they go through a separation process, which is pretty inefficient. I mean, get a reasonable separation, but the steel and the aluminum and the copper go back off into their relative smelters. Plastics have always been the hard part, and we'll get into a little conversation about what HP's been doing on that, but they've always been the holy grail of recycling because they're hard to separate mechanically based on their physical and chemical properties. They're often mixed plastics, and whenever it costs more to do something, typically the wrong thing happens, right? That's particularly as the recycling industry for electronics typically grew out of the scrap metal industry. So you want to make sure that the right things are being done when recycling is being done.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, in the processing facilities that I've been a part of, it was always when you, especially when you're dealing with, with gold and silver and mercury and carbon, and there's fundamentally a lot of difference between a lot of those different materials. And so it's an interesting thought when you think about plastic and there being so much commonality between different types of plastic. You're right, your ability to sort and visually sort, or in the moment you start to melt things down, there's obviously fumes, and there's things that you have as a byproduct of that. So yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about how similar some of those materials are to each other and how that would throw a bit of a monkey wrench into the process.
No, we do have the technology to make plastic circular today, and in fact, the vendor that we use in Montreal, the Laverne Group, they're able to make plastic circular. So some of our ink cartridges, for instance, they've
Mhm.
gone around 10, 12 times. Right? The
Okay.
plastic does not degrade. And, the owner of that plant would absolutely argue, we do not need to make any more plastic on this planet. We have enough. We just need
Yeah.
to make sure it becomes circular. And, you just need to walk out your door and look at what's on the street, and you would probably agree we don't need to make any more plastic, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. I every time I see one of the ocean cleanup or the river cleanup, it's the plastic is the one thing that jumps out the most that seems to be in
mhm.
there. So, so how are you starting to see organizations, look to include sustainability metrics? Because I think, part of what I want to do today is, for listeners that are saying, hey, it does make sense that we're making more decisions based on sustainability. It does make sense to be more of a total cost of ownership, decision making around our technology. How are organizations starting to include sustainability in their decision making processes?
So how are they currently doing it, and how would I like them to do it? Maybe two different
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Um, because of the lack of literacy in this, and let's, WWF, World Wildlife Fund, not the Wrestling Federation, estimate there's 1 billion business decisions made every day in Canada. And I want you to just imagine what percentage are truly made with sustainability in mind. Not very many. And there's multiple reasons for that. Um, but where would I like organizations to start if they were really just getting started would be to look at their procurement. And
Hmm.
the reason for that is particularly when we're talking about technology, most of the impacts are really in what we're bringing into the organization. Yes, we can buy renewable energy, we can do some recycling on site, but those are pretty irrelevant in the world that we live in today. You have to do some of that, but you have to do that and the procurement piece. And let's face it, I use the analogy that procurement is kind of like where technology was maybe 20 years ago. There were these weird people in the corner, and if you just left them to it, they would get the job done. But don't lift the hood, don't ask too many questions. Every business is a technology business today. And I would argue that procurement is really a strategic piece of an organization that is really underutilized in terms of strategy for a business today. So sustainable procurement's where it's at, and of course, we're really at the infancy of that practice in Canada. So I spend a lot of time teaching about that, um, and I think the other couple of things that we want organizations to think about is, sustainability is a team sport. You'll find your
Hmm.
teams want to be engaged in this. It's a key differentiator for you. Um, and technology gives us a lot of opportunity for sustainability leadership and expertise. The CIO could actually become a very big contributor to reducing an organization's footprint. Just need to think about it and be deliberate about it. Um, yeah, I think that's enough on that one. Let's go to the next question.
Yeah, I think it's a good point because I think you're right. I think it can start at different levels. It can start with different initiatives. It can be top down. It can be sort of grassroots up. But you're right. I mean, if you're not including it, if you're writing an RFP and you don't have some sort of metric in there, at least as a measurable goal of your RFP, then it may not even be considered as you're going through the process, and
And
so.
that is mostly the case today in Canada. And I use the analogy a little bit. This is a good one to think about. Um, let's say you genuinely decide you want to reduce your carbon footprint as an organization. Um, you can start bailing the boat, or you can try and fix the hole that's in the boat, which is
Yeah.
the procurement piece, right? I have a longer story of a hospital that decided they wanted to eliminate liquid mercury in a hospital, which of course is a very toxic substance, so you don't want it in a hospital. So they spent oodles of money paying somebody to go into every closet, get all of those old blood pressure devices out, and
Hmm.
paid to dispose of them responsibly, which was a lot of money, but they forgot to stop the doctors buying new ones.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
new ones were coming in because people just like their old habits. It's change management at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's no reason to, if you're working to put out the forest fire, don't keep lighting it in different areas. Yeah.
Hmm.
So now I think we kind of defined, kind of what it is and what the current state is. I guess what's starting to change. How has the way that we consume technology, how for that 6% of sustainability decisions that are being made, how is sustainability changing, and do you see the timeline, do you see us accelerating and learning? Do you see that there's just more advocate, being an advocate and pushing knowledge is the way forward, but how are things changing today?
Well, I think a few things. If you take the average Canadian organization, typically a small, medium business, right? They may not be doing much themselves, but I think they're starting to feel the pressure. So it's the new staff members coming in, right? It's kind of expected from them these days. Their customers might start asking them questions. So they were seeing many multinationals who are drawing on those longer supply chains, asking for it. Governments are starting to ask for it. So there's an expectation that something gets done. Um, Still at the stage of many organizations really just, well, what do we need to do, and not really understanding where to go next, or where to start. So I'd say, given the scale of the emergency that we're facing, there's not nearly enough action happening.
Yeah, I hear you there, and it's kind of interesting because it's also sometimes easier to ask or demand from your partners before you do it yourself. And so, to your point around sort of where HP is leading a charge here, and they're looking to pull along, partners like CDW. It's also, it's incumbent upon customers to demand that their suppliers are helping build this sustainable circular economy as well. So we're kind of touching on supply chain. How important is the supply chain, and having sustainability really thought about at each layer of the supply chain to the overall success that we want to achieve here?
It's critical, and it's really why we need the circular economy too. So the fastest way to green your organization is to buy from somebody who's already done it, right? That's a very
Mhm.
simple statement. So then you start that tiering down the supply chain, and tech supply chains are very long and complicated, and you often don't have visibility down to, say, a tier 5 supplier because of the nature of business. My supplier does not want me to know who their supplier is, because otherwise I might cut them out, right? So there's some tensions in the system that prevent a lot of transparency, but we have to work the best way we can. There's lots of systems already in place for that. But if we think about HP's global carbon footprint, so we have 55,000 employees in 100 plus countries. Our total carbon footprint, that operational footprint, is just 1% of our total impact.
Mm.
60 odd percent is in our supply chain, and the rest is in our customers using our products because they're energy consuming and paper using. So the 60% for us, we're going after big buckets of carbon. That's kind of, I want everybody to be thinking about that. Where are the big buckets of carbon in my value chain? And it really is that digging the metals out of the ground, digging the oil out of the ground to make the plastics, and then all the sort of manufacturing and transportation that goes along with that. So if we don't have to dig that stuff out of the ground in the first place, because we've recovered materials from the end of life products, we will significantly address that big 60+%.
Yeah, and that actually makes an interesting, and this wasn't something we talked about before, but are there are there the facilities within Canada to do a lot of the recycling they were talking about? Like you mentioned, plastics recovery out of Montreal. When you think about, because one of the things I've seen just historically is the, taking technology, e-waste, and shipping it overseas to then have them recycle it in other locales. Do we have those capabilities in Canada?
We do, and the reason it gets shipped offshore is because it's cheaper, right?
Mm,
So, recycling costs money to do well and to meet all of our security and environmental requirements. And it requires monitoring too, like anything. You've got to vendor manage those vendors, and that's not cheap to do. So, um, I would say anything can be recycled. It's how easy can you make it to be recycled? And then if we think about longer term, and I know you come from a mining background, we're not going to have to stop mining. We're still going to have to do mining because the circular economy can only take up a certain amount of circulation, I guess,
hmm
as the global population grows and the demand for technology grows, we're still going to need mining. But if you think about, today we would, as I said, a typical notebook computer, we would take the battery out and then we'd put it through a big shredder. We're destroying the embedded carbon in the chips that are in here,
Yeah.
right? Because we just send them back into a smelter. Well, actually, what we need to do is recover the reusable parts in there and put them back into new products. But this is where that key piece of buying as a service is the single biggest thing you can do to contribute to the circular economy. Because I cannot sell you a computer that has used components in it for the risk of, my OEM brand promise of high quality, blah, blah, blah. That risk, perceived risk of a used part going in there and it failing, well, if I'm there to fix it tomorrow, you probably won't be too unhappy with that. If we've sold transactionally and we don't even have a relationship anymore and I don't know you and you don't know me, it fails, you're going to go, well, that was a crappy product. I'm never going to buy HP again, right? So that's one of the reasons why it's so critical that services becomes a key component of how all businesses move forward.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think you're right. I'm glad we took time at the beginning to discuss the circular economy because everything kind of comes back to through that whole life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So so when we think about who within an organization, um, obviously things can start at different levels, but who within an organization needs to be that change agent, and really create this focus on sustainability.
I'm going to read you a quote now. It comes from Auden Chandler. He's the former head of sustainability at Aspen Skiing Co. And he said, I would happily spend the rest of my life changing light bulbs and retrofitting buildings. It's incredibly gratifying. It saves money, it reduces pollution, it makes buildings run better. But there's only one problem. It's not a solution to the climate problem. Right? So we get very sidetracked on doing the easy to do things
Mm.
and not focusing on the big buckets of carbon. So who in an organization has the ability to take a relatively young practice and make things happen? Change management, right? Who has that ability? So it's leadership, right? Who has that?
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes from the bottom, but it's a lot more effective if leadership take it and run with it. And today we see sustainability teams sitting in many different parts of an organization. There's no one home that is kind of the right home for them. I would argue you do need some sustainability professionals because you need somebody with some expertise. But at the end of the day, many of them are really hired to be what I'd call fig leaves. They're just covering up. They're not actually doing change management that needs to happen. And I always use a good example of, where does the head of sustainability sit in the organization? It gives you a very quick indicator of how seriously they're taking this. So, as an example, for HP Canada, I head up our sustainability practice. I'm actually housed in the sales organization, but I report directly to the CEO.
Mm.
That's the level of importance that we put on it. And I need to be able to see what's going on in the organization, do a lot of mentoring and training and upbringing, but I'm seeing where the organization is going and looking for those opportunities.
I think it's really good to sort of lay that out, and I think that again, as an IT professional, a lot of times the struggle is, I know my organization has values that they've committed to. Corporations project what their value focus is, and for organizations that are really investing in community, they're investing in safety and health, they're investing in minimizing their impact to the environment, etc. Sometimes it's hard for the procurement department hard for the IT department to kind of understand how they tie into that. So I think I think the concepts you're talking about are absolutely, needed, especially when we're trying to figure out how do I take my day to day and align it with these values and goals that are, maybe a little more ephemeral than I'm used to. It's not, blinking lights in a server room. So when we have those leaders and when we have those people within the organization that are making the push, how does that manifest in sort of the mindset of the organization? Are there positive symptoms that we see start to develop?
So there's a couple of things that help sustainability come along, and one of the practices I have is I train every single new hire that comes into my organization because I want them to understand. And I had an employee telling me this just last night. You taught me for 2 hours, Frances, that sustainability was part of my job. Right. And we encourage every employee, after having done that training and learning about all of the enormous goals that we have, they can then take whatever fascinates them, because it's a broad tent, we need work in many, many different areas. They can take that and they can add that into their own personal goals, their performance indicators. So we encourage every employee to do that. So you've got that motivation at the bottom level, and then you need some structure around, well, where are we going? What's the big picture that we're going after? And if we think about procurement, the definition of sustainable procurement is looking for best value for the most sustainable service or good, and I say service is over goods because it's a circular economy conversation, from the most sustainable supplier, but in alignment with our organization's purpose and goals.
Hmm.
And it's that piece that really rarely gets done, because procurement, again, is a walled off different function, and IT could almost be the same. So it would behoove the IT professionals to look at what their organization has publicly stated for goals. Most large
Hmm.
organizations certainly have sustainability reports, and then start thinking about where can they align on that, and putting it into the decision-making process of, have we actually considered this? Are we thinking about it? And that check back, right? Because it might be the theme for this month and then it'll get forgotten about next month, right? So it's like any business process: plan, do, check, act, and keep cycling back to see how we're doing. And transparency is really important too. Um,
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think also, not getting discouraged, knowing that these types of initiatives, they take time, and especially if it's more of a grassroots sort of bottom up approach, it can take time before you see some of those larger changes happening for
it
sure.
absolutely can, but our house is on fire, literally.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So, if I can leave you with, a couple of key things, um, it's a team sport, and you will find support in many different areas of an organization. And if you find resistance, just go around them, right? Don't try
Mhm.
to, don't headbutt against resistance. But it's about change management, and it's about taking action fast. And we're in a little bit of the Wild West in that sustainability is a fairly young science. We don't have
Mhm.
all the metrics that we need, and so don't let perfection be the enemy of the good either. Like, certainly in procurement, we talk about your next most sustainable bid document, or your most sustainable bid document is your next one. It's an iterative process. We just
Mm.
we just need to get there, and we need to be bold. I was just coaching some students who are doing some research for me on buying as a service, and I said, I need you to come up with some guidelines for people who haven't
Mhm.
done all the work that you've done and don't understand what's going on. And they were very reluctant. Well, we're not experts in this. I'm like, who is an expert in this, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody's practicing buying as a service really in Canada. You know a lot more than the most people do now. Give them some recommendations. So
Yeah,
it's a little bit about
yeah.
leadership, right? Stepping up from any level of an organization, and everybody. That's where tech companies tend to be a little more innovative, I would say, and that fail fast, try new things type idea. And I think we need a lot more of that, particularly in procurement.
Yeah, and I do like that. I like that's where we've had some really good. I've had some really good interactions with some of our academy team and some of our newer sales reps and some of our newer technical people. It is a fresh perspective, and there is a need to encourage them to speak up and be more vocal. But you touched on a couple of things there. what are some of the key barriers within these organizations? And so what are some of the roadblocks that people are going to hit? And then we'll talk a little bit about, ways to maybe mitigate some of that. But what are some of the main roadblocks and barriers that you encounter when you're talking to customers?
Well, I'm going to throw one in that we hadn't previously talked about, but this is the way so our financial systems, the almighty dollar is already a bad measure of value, right?
Hmm.
We're missing a whole bunch of externalities and all those other things. And then what we do within an organization is, because we don't measure total cost of ownership, and for a whole bunch of reasons why, we then are not actually measuring the true costs of something coming into our organization. So we have what's called I define it as a mini tragedy of the commons within an organization, that nobody really is measuring all those true costs. And I'll give you a good example. I talked to a head of procurement for a very large company, and I said, you do realize you're about to buy the least repairable laptop on the market. And he said, well, I don't care. If it breaks down, I'll just buy a new one tomorrow. Nobody measures that. Right?
Yeah.
That is a little crazy, but that aside, so the financial systems themselves, particularly that transition from CapEx to OpEx, can be a very sticky transition. And again, another reason why people don't go for as a service, which is, that key component of the circular economy. But generally speaking, people think it's going to cost a lot. They don't actually know what to do or who should do it. So those are sort of very simple things. But they're also they're not thinking about the cost of not doing it. Right? What's the
Mm.
cost of, you've got a bunch of employees who are very keen and interested in doing this, and you choose not to take any of their ideas or do it. They become disillusioned, and they're going to go move to the next company that is doing something about it, right? It's a values conversation today, buying with value and values. They also think that nobody really cares about this, and I'm just going to give you a couple of data points that literally were released last week, and these come from LSF, Learning for a Sustainable Future, that HP allows me 4 hours a month of paid time to do volunteering, and so I volunteer as vice chair of the board for this organization. So 87% of Canadians say they'd be willing to change their life to reduce the impacts of climate change. 87%,
Hmm.
that's huge. And 74% of Canadians are anxious or frustrated about climate change. So that's most people in your organization are feeling like that, want to do something. And if you're not giving them an outlet to do something at work, we spend a lot of our time at work, shame on you, right? Like, there's some untapped human potential there.
Yeah, there also seems to be a bit of a dichotomy between if your organization, has a value, communicated values of environment and people and community, and then they're not necessarily making decisions based in that same value set. That also kind of creates an environment where you feel strange sometimes as an employee of the organization, right? We say one thing, but
Yeah,
we're
that
making decisions in a different
internal
manner.
inconsistencies, for sure.
So how many of these barriers that we talk about are FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, as opposed to, what are, some of the ones that are maybe a little more, concrete?
So let's go with, our house is literally on fire, global economy's on shaky ground. Our future really depends on it. And let me give you a little statistic. So the World Economic Forum estimate that nearly every business could take 30% of the carbon out of their operations at no additional cost.
Hmm.
Why aren't they doing that? That's simply business running inefficiently. The first duty of business is to minimize waste, not to maximize profit, right? And it's really waste at the end of the day. So, that thing it's going to cost more is, nearly every business has some low-hanging fruit that they can get working on. As you go up the hierarchy, yes, there's going to be more things. But one of the observations I've made about the partner community generally in Canada, when I've seen the assessments, was that if, as they're part of the Amplify Impact program, the first thing they do is a self-assessment, and that benchmarks them against the worldwide peer average. And we break it into 5 main areas, and many of our partners are doing really well. They've got DE&I programs, they've done a lot of the work, but what they haven't done is they haven't seen the sustainability as a business advantage, right? There are customers out there who will proactively choose to do business with you if you step up and do more on sustainability. So that's a barrier that greases the skip, basically. There's opportunity there, and I think we need to help business leaders really see that and then walk the talk on really integrating those goals into how they buy, the purpose and the goals of an organization reflected not only in the questions that they ask in RFPs, but is it scored sufficiently to make it matter to their suppliers? And that's a big deal. I see a lot of RFPs from every sector of the Canadian economy, and the two most common things are very poorly asked questions that just wide open for greenwashing answers, false misleading claims, and
Hmm.
not scored in any way, shape, or form. So basically, what that tells your supplier is, well, I had to put something in here, but I don't really care about it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it just becomes a creative authoring exercise rather than something that's meaningful. Yeah, one of the things we did different, and I didn't realize that we did this differently until I moved from being in a corporate organization into being more on the sales side, is I always published my scoring criteria as part of the RFP that I was putting out to the market, and so for me. Um, my respondents always knew exactly how much each of the various decision making criteria, what the level of importance was. And so I've always found that kind of interesting, where if you don't not only if you don't have the things like sustainability in your RFP submissions, but if you're also not showing the level of importance, is it 5%, is it 10%, is it 20% of your decision making process, it does sort of create this creative writing assignment as opposed to an actionable plan. So that's a good point.
And
um
actually, the experts
yeah.
are telling us it needs to be upwards of 30% to get it to really matter to suppliers to get them to do stuff.
Okay, that's interesting. I
Hmm.
hadn't heard that. That's but that would definitely be a sizable enough to have it impact your overall decision making. So we talked a little bit about some of the challenges that people perceive being there that maybe are more fear, uncertainty, doubt. Let's flip it to the other side. What are some of the barriers that organizations maybe aren't thinking about initially, but may jump up and bite them if they don't pay attention?
Well, the latest one is the greenwashing piece, right? That we have new
Mm,
legislation in Canada that really, and it's sensible. If you're going to make a claim, then you absolutely should be able to back it up with some good science. And so I'm very appreciative of that legislation, and I think it's a good thing. Most greenwashing, I think, is done inadvertently, not deliberately, and it's because people don't really understand full life cycle thinking. One of the examples would be, organic cigarettes. Doesn't really matter that it's organic because they're going to kill you anyway, right? I mean, or zero cholesterol in a bottle of water. Well, that's completely irrelevant, right? It's in a plastic anyway. Um, so we need to think about greenwashing aside and marketing, but that comes after you've really gotten some sustainability programs going. A couple of things that HP has learned is, and this is changing with time, but when we first started putting, say, recycled plastic, post-consumer recycled plastics in our inkjet cartridges, and we were very happy. It took us a long time to figure out how to do it and get the technology sorted out. And we kind of did, our engineers and people like myself did our little happy dance. What we didn't realize was the market really wasn't ready yet. And so our marketing team
mm,
wouldn't even let us tell customers that there was recycled plastic because was a perception that it would be of a lower quality and that it should cost less. When actually it should cost more, right? But we don't charge more for that. So you need to have a full team approach and bring all of the different departments within a business along with you. Um, and I think this education piece, I already mentioned, I train every new hire that comes in, and I do a lot of public speaking around just the basics on circular economy. And I can give you a statistic. Over 5,000 sustainability courses have been taken by our partners' employees over the last 5 years,
okay.
right? So there's an appetite for employees to learn more about this and to become more literate in the things and the decisions that they're making.
Yeah, well, those are good examples. And then you know, what are some of the challenges in finding sustainable partners? And so, if you're talking to your procurement department, and you're looking at the way you're making your decisions, and you are, bringing the whole team together. What are some of the challenges with finding those partners that can really align with those values?
Well, in my experience, many procurement departments are very underfunded and understaffed. So they don't have the time to go out and do market assessments of what's really available. And so they practice a very old-fashioned style of, I need this box with this many criteria, instead of going, well, I need this, I need to be able to compute. That's what I need. I don't need the box. I need to compute. So it's thinking about how do we ask those questions differently to get better answers from suppliers. I have a friend who practices priceless procurement. So she knows what her budget is. So she goes to market with, here's how much I have to spend on this. Now compete.
Hmm.
Now compete on all these other things that are more, that are important to me. And this is particularly true in commoditized products, I would say. But if you're looking for innovative stuff and very different things, then you might approach it differently. But um, asking for that vendor information on what's the art of the possible today, as opposed to, well, I've always bought this and I'm just going to scratch the date off my last RFP and 5 years on, just put a new date on it, which is criminal in technology purchasing because of just the security issues alone are very different, right? So we really need that rethink of how we do. In fact, I'd almost say blow up procurement and start again. Um, it's a system that was designed to prevent bad things from happening, but it prevents good things from happening too.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that too. And yeah, sometimes the barriers is not the technology. It's the, like you said before, the change management and the mindset and the processes. So if we do have, listeners out there, they're like, okay, great, sign me up. Is it possible to have a fully sustainable technology procurement practice, today in Canada?
Absolutely. And there's lots of tools and guidance out there on how to do it. I'll make sure I supply some for the audience so they have links to them. But it is absolutely possible. And, I would really ask you to do that because we have very, very big goals. So HP wants to be 75% circular for products and packaging by 2030. That's just 5 years away. We're today
Yeah.
we're today at 40%, so we're doing way better than Canada. But we absolutely cannot do this without customers and partners coming with us on this. So, we need to get the materials back. We need customers to be buying with that in mind. And our engineers are chomping at the bit to do more, to put higher levels of recycled plastic in there, to make our products more durable. The product I'm looking at you from right now as an executive at HP is a refurbished HP laptop. I don't get a new laptop as an executive at HP. Right? We really walk the talk. We're sweating the life of our computers to prove that we can do it. So, yeah, it's absolutely possible. And if customers come with us and start that demand signal, we will do more and do better. And it's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing because the outcome is what you're working towards, and I think it's also as you start to build momentum, it will continue to gather
Mm-hmm.
steam and as it goes forward. So let's talk about some of the challenges that we want to mitigate. So we talked about some of the fear, uncertainty, doubt. We talked about maybe some of the concerns that people aren't necessarily thinking about. Um, as an individual, how do I build this sort of into my day to day decision making? And I love what you were talking about. A lot of it's just education, knowing what's available and what's possible. But where can individuals kind of start with educating and understanding and sort of incorporating that into their mental model?
Um, So there's a lot of tools and resources and training out there, and I would say becoming basically carbon literate within the tech space that we're talking about. Where is the relative carbon footprint? And then thinking about the decisions that you make on a daily basis. Where is that impact? Is there something I could do differently? Asking
Hmm.
the questions, seeking some guidance and help. There's lots of information out there, as I said. Um, and some of the organizations I work with, the very first thing they did, and this is a hospital consortium, was they sent a letter to all of their suppliers saying, and they have thousands as a hospital, right? They saying, we're starting down a sustainability journey. We want you to come with us. Heads up, it's coming. We're going to be asking sustainability questions, and we're going to be scoring those questions. So you're sort of setting your supply chain partners on the right track to know that something is coming, and recognizing that you're not going to get everything right first off. We'll
Hmm.
we'll we'll fail fast and we'll learn and we'll keep going, but The stakes are too high for us not to take these steps, right? Our actions that we take in the next 5 years will resonate on this planet for thousands of years. Right? That it's that simple, and it's literally 5 years. And many people don't understand that sense of urgency. So they don't understand the tipping points that we're really close to. And it will not be a case of, oh, well, now I understand it, I'll do it tomorrow. No,
Yeah.
it's too late by then. The tipping points will be passed, and the planet will, continue on its way, but it won't be a habitable planet for humans.
Yeah, you can't, Pandora's box.
Yeah, and
You can't just
scientists,
close it back
yeah, the
up.
scientists are literally telling us, we're over a degree in average temperature rise right now. They're telling us over 2 degrees C. They don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
and so who wants to go in? This is our home. Who wants to go into uncharted territory?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, exactly. So if individuals are educating, they're better understanding the impact and the overall, what that really means to us and our children. Where can organizations look to start formalizing sustainability programs? And we'll do our best to put a bunch of links into the podcast. So there'll be the links that you recommend, and there's probably some internal stuff that we have at CDW as well. But I think part of what our conversation before was is that it's likely that you need some assistance in really building an actual sustainability program that's part of your the DNA of your organization. But you can help me understand, how do we formalize?
Right. So I would agree, some help from a sustainability professional would be good. And, here's another reason to do it sooner rather than later. We really don't have that many sustainability professionals in Canada. So get one fast while you can, because they're already in short supply. The HP Amplify Impact Program for any partners is free. Take it and go. Even for unmanaged partners, they can leverage all the tools and resources in there. And we took everything that we've developed over the years, and we put it into this web-enabled system. It's worth somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000, and it's free. Go for it, right? There's also a website, Sustainability Advantage, one of Canada's wonderful resources. He's retired now, so he creates all the tools and resources you could possibly need, and he gives them away mostly for free. So that's a pretty good one. So in the Amplify Impact Program, you would take a self-assessment. I already mentioned that. That gives you a benchmarking, and then you start to pick on the key things that would be important to you. Setting some goals, even if you don't know that you can meet them, these stretch goals or moonshot goals is pretty important because they give people permission to keep trying. Aligning staff, you've got to assign some resources to this. This doesn't happen overnight, and it's not for free,
Yep.
right? Tracking, this is basic business management, plan, do, check, act. And this commitment to transparency. You cannot be sustainable if you're not transparent. That's it's a double negative there, I apologize, but really it's so key. And it's very difficult for many organizations who are not, typically don't like to disclose things, but that sunlight brings a whole bunch of good things to happen. We said we're going to do this, we may miss that goal, but here's why, or, that stretch goal is an important thing to do. So those are, pretty basic, sensible management tactics.
Yeah, for sure. And then when you look at that that maturity sort of timeline, what does that look like? What are some of the stages that organizations go through?
You can go pretty fast on this, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The training will take some time, obviously, but getting the goals set or aligning on some goals, getting employees organized around it, getting some basic education there. You can move pretty fast depending on the size of the organization. And there's lots of tools and resources out there, as I said, that are free. So there's not even necessarily a cost in the early stages. Employee time is training time. That does cost. But I think the engagement that you get as a result of that is well worth it. It's a very high ROI there.
So let's shift gears a little bit into like specifically what HP is doing, because I think that you've talked a little bit about it, but when we really sort of look at from a higher level and drilling down, where HP is really focused on sustainability, what is HP doing to realize the circular economy and kind of help me understand where that's going in the future?
Okay, so circular economy, the big goal, 75% circularity for products and packaging by 2030. This year, we're trying to get to 30% post-consumer recycled plastics across our entire product portfolio. Some will have more, some will have less. We're eliminating 75% of single-use plastics in our packaging, going very heavily into molded pulp. You'll be familiar with the packaging. That's molded pulp packaging. Little difficult to do on the print side where you've got very heavy devices. You kind of need the foam in there. So we're doing a lot of innovation there. We've been working on forests and protecting forests. But I
Hmm.
think the biggest thing for us is that transition from selling boxes to selling services.
Mm.
Um, and that sounds very simple to do, but actually, our whole system, not just HP, any organization, is, how are your sales teams compensated? How, your partners, how are they? It's all centered on selling boxes, right? It's not sent. So you really have to shift a lot of things to get to that nirvana of the circular economy of selling services, but it's worth it in the end. And it really helps customers come along with you and HP partnerships in the name, right? We know that no one organization can do this alone. Sustainability is a team sport, so you need to bring your full value chain along with you, which we're doing through the Amplify Impact program, investing very heavily in that. It's available in 11 languages.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll commit my time to taking some of the training that you've recommended and see what I can do as well. Because I do think that it's good to have that be an advocate and move things forward for sure.
Indeed.
So to kind of tie a bow on all of this, what does this future state look like that we're trying to move towards? And if you think about the circular and sustainable economy, how can that look in the future? And then what excites you about starting to achieve some of these goals where we're not just changing light bulbs and remodeling, we're actually fixing the foundation.
So thank you for asking that question because I think that's one of the hardest things for people to really imagine because we're so far away from a truly circular economy, right? So I would start with, procurement has become a truly strategic enabler of the organization. They're very central. They're resourced and invested in properly. Services are purchased much more than goods are purchased. We're seeing some really aggressive scoring in bid documents and things like a requirement for suppliers to run on renewable energy and to have high percentages of recycled materials in there. All organizations will be running on clean electricity, which is a little worrying when you think about Ontario, where we're going away. We had a very clean grid, and we're going away from that. How do we keep the politicians understanding how critical that is to our economy and our future business success? Every business decision gets made not only with a dollar sign, but with a carbon sign, a biodiversity, and a human resources sort of social impact in mind, and particularly with Indigenous there. One of the things we've done with Indigenous peoples that, we're a decade past the Truth and Reconciliation Report. Virtually no businesses have done anything on reconciliation. And yet that's a clear requirement in the Truth and Reconciliation Report for every business, not just Indigenous businesses, right? So start asking your suppliers about that. I would like to see all Canadians, not just people in the workforce, but all Canadians being well educated on how do we protect our home? How do we make sure that we have a
Hmm.
livable planet? And then that disclosure, that transparency on, we don't expect everybody to be perfect and doing everything, but, we think about what the average business can focus on 3 or 4 things at once, any one time, getting people rowing in the same direction. Well, which direction are they rowing in and how are we focusing that and are we being transparent about it? So those are just some of the things I would like to see in a truly sustainable or circular society. And of course, the other piece is, and it's not often talked about in a business sense, but you need to talk to your politicians about this. They're making the
Yeah.
decisions today, right now, actually, on how is Canada going to move forward on these big infrastructure projects. What does it look like? Will we have stranded assets? Where is our taxpayers' money being spent, and how are those decisions being made? And politicians are no different than anybody else. They don't necessarily have any sustainability education. They don't know what the circular economy is. So maybe we have to go and talk to them and anybody who will listen.
Yeah, and I think, again, like, I appreciate you jumping on the podcast with me because I mean, it's an opportunity for us to learn more, and there's obviously a bunch of concepts today that I've learned, and so I really appreciate you, joining me here and walking me through all of this, and I do like the idea of a circular economy. I like the idea of having a smaller impact on our environment, and I do think that we need to. I think probably the biggest concept for me is that it starts with the design phase. It starts with engineering. It starts with making things that are easier to be, included in the circular economy, and not designed to be disposed of. So very cool. Well, I really appreciate it, Francis. Thanks for jumping on the podcast with me. Some great ideas, and I think just raising general awareness is always a good thing with topics like sustainability.
Well, thank you. And, a couple of key takeaways. Sustainability is a team sport. It's a very broad topic, so you can't know everything about it. Transparency is key. And, we have all the solutions we need. This is not a technology issue. This is a change management issue. And most business leaders know how to do change management. So let's just flip it from always about profit to profit and. And I think we'll
Yeah.
have a more livable planet, but do it now. Do it yesterday.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. So thanks for joining us for the podcast. I've been your host, KJ Burke. Francis, really appreciate you jumping on the podcast. And for those of you that are listening, we'll have another podcast next month. And keep growing, keep learning, keep thriving. And thanks for joining us.